now I feel like I'm at a university.
We're going to give you an honorary degree after this.
Thank you for all of you coming. I know some of you took a long drive, and thank you.
So I'm fortunate that I get to interview you instead of you interviewing me.
I know, it's an interesting time for me this week. I just spent an hour yesterday with people in Silicon Valley interviewing me, which doesn't happen very often, and now you can actually take the top of my head off and poke around in my brain, so being a neurosurgeon.
Hopefully we're not going to do that tonight. Although some people have asked me to put a lecture out.
I would imagine there have been.
I was just talking about sort of backstories, and you have a fascinating backstory. And what drives somebody to overcome adversity really always interests me, and what drives somebody to seek change interests me. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and pretty much what I ask everyone who sort of comes and visits with me, except for the Dalai Lama. I know there were problems that you had with drugs and alcohol at some point. I know it created extraordinary difficulties, ultimately led to the dissolution of your marriage and divorce, and I'm sure it caused immense pain, not only to yourself, but to many of those around you. Mm-hmm. What was sort of the path that led you to that point? And ultimately, what were the things that allowed you to overcome that?
Something that I shared for the first time here recently is there were two turning points in my life on the negative side. And one was a misunderstanding and turned into egotism. And the other was, oh, poor me. And the first one was I was about 7 years old, and I heard clear as a bell, what you do in your life will be a turning point. And I didn't know what that meant, and but I remembered it. I'm 8. My mother gives me for my birthday a set of record albums. One of them was War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells, Orson Welles. The rest was The Shadow with Orson Welles, and Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy, and Jack Benny and Bob Hope. And I listened to these guys on the radio, and they were fantastic. And I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories on the radio. And so I fused those two things together. I'm 13. My mom is addicted to drugs and alcohol, and she commits suicide. And now I'm in the poor me. And I couple the poor me with the I'm on a mission, and I'm going to make something of my life. And no one in my family had ever gone to college. Nobody in my family had ever made over $25,000 a year. My grandfather had a 4th grade education. My father was horribly abused as a child and did everything he could not to abuse us, but then married to abusers. And so just things just spiraled out of control, and I focused on work. And every time I would have an idea and I'd think, this is it, somebody else would beat me to it. And it led to this, never being able to be filled, because I was looking for fulfillment in success and money and fame and everything else. And that's just a total sham. And then this constant frustration of, I know that's true, because I heard that. Where am I missing it? It leads me to be friendless, just an amazing jerk. I just met most of you, and at this point in my life, there's no way I would have stood in line and shook anyone's hand, because the audience was meaningless to me. The audience was just a way for me to do what I was supposed to do. And so my whole world was upside down. I'm friendless. I have no opportunities for jobs. No one will work with me because I'm just an egomaniac. My marriage is falling apart. I don't think I'm an alcoholic because alcoholics are broke and living on the street, and I was functioning. I was running stations for Clear Channel, blasted out of my mind, and mainly running them into the ground, but it's my 30th birthday. I'm in bed. The clock flicks to 12, and it's still the LED digital lights, and I don't remember if you remember when they used to kind of jump a little bit, and it might have been my drinking, but I remember them jumping a little bit, and I thought, your life is about to change, because it cannot go on this way. Your life is about to change. And it did. And by the time I was 35, I was sober. I know, I was not drinking. I was not married. I had enrolled to go to school at Yale, given my first communist newspaper on my first day by a student at Yale. I promptly handed it back to him and said, when you're raising 2 kids and have a job and you're more than 21, come back and give me the communist newspaper and we'll talk. And then I tried to put things together, and I was going to just destroy my career. I wanted to get out of radio. I wanted to, I don't know, do something creative, but small. And my father saved me from getting out of radio. He said, you knew what you wanted to be when you were little, and you haven't been given this talent and haven't honed it all these years to just leave. Why don't you find the things that you want to talk about? So I did, and I was on Top 40 radio, and I started talking about God, and that didn't go over well. And so I started to sabotage my own career. And somebody said to me, some caller called in, and it was about the Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton thing, and they said, you just think you're so perfect. And I said, no, you don't have any idea who I am. Let me tell you something. And I remember that everybody in the room, the whole team, there were like 8 people on the team, and they were like, oh, good God, what is he gonna say? And I said, let me tell you who I am. And I told the worst parts about me. I turned off the microphone and I looked to my producer, who's still my producer, Stu, and I said, write this day down in your diary. This is the day Glenn Beck ended his career. And the exact opposite thing happened. Because I was actually authentic for the first time, people were like, I can relate to you. It took me a while to figure that out. And then to wrap it all up, I was still trying to hold my sobriety, and I couldn't. And I needed God. And I had prayed and prayed and prayed, and I said, I just need a lifeboat. And I said, I'm gonna drink Thursday. And if I drink Thursday, it's your fault, not mine, because I told you I'm going to the bar. And if you're God, you can stop me from going to the bar, clearly. I need a roadblock. And I went to the bar on Thursday, and I was yelling at God we have an interesting relationship, but I'm yelling at him in the car, and I'm like, I'm telling you right now, I told you, I'm drinking. I am off this path. And I get to the bar, and I order a Jack and Coke, and he puts it in front of me, and I grab it, and I turn around, and I'm gonna drink it, and there across the room, a woman is looking at me that I had met twice before, and who I thought was one of the most gentle souls I had ever met. And I looked at her, and I realized, that's my roadblock. And I put the drink down, and I walked over, and I asked her if she would go to a diner with me and have a cup of coffee. And we have not been apart since. Her plane is landing, and her plane is landing. She's late. It was icy in Dallas, and so she'll be here in a few minutes. But
Oh. So what then led to, you were on Fox News?
poof. I never wanted to be the guy that everybody thinks I am, and I'm not that guy. I mean, I am and I'm not. I mean, it's not...
What is the guy you think that people think you...
The cartoon character. They think I'm a cartoon character. They think that I'm the guy who, and yes, I did wear lederhosen for an episode, yes. And I have been a character on a full episode of The Simpsons. So yes, I am technically a cartoon character, but I am not the guy who, I've never said, trust me. I don't trust people who say trust me. I say, do your own homework. Don't take this from me. Don't be spoon-fed this nonsense. I'm learning just like you are. I'm trying to figure it out just like everybody else is. And I'm a guy who, Jon Stewart made fun of me so much when I cried on the air, and I love you because you cry. And guys that cry, I mean, at least they're real. And I would like to point out Jon Stewart cried on his last episode, but I was on the air and I got emotional and I said, I'm sorry, I just love my country and I feel like it's slipping away. Well, that was an honest emotion. The reason why I was at Fox, I was leaving CNN, and we were going to do what I'm about to begin to do now. And, but I really, truly believed the world was in real danger. And when I went there, I was foolish enough to think that people in the media were honest. I really thought that people in the media engaged their brain at some point, that there was some honest intellectual curiosity at some level. And then that's one of the reasons why I said, I wasn't just saying it to the audience of, hey, do your own homework. I was saying it to the press. Do your own homework. Do not take my word for this. Look it up. Here it is. But there was no intellectual curiosity. There still isn't. And so I kind of found myself in this place of doing a good job of bringing the news to people and getting them. Who else could be number one talking about The Road to Serfdom, a book that came out in the 1950s? Who else could do 2 days on Woodrow Wilson and be number one? We had to be entertaining. If there was a way I could have done it and been Charlie Rose, I would have rather done that, but nobody watches Charlie Rose.
I watched Charlie Rose.
You're the one.
That's what we modeled the show after. Well, it's interesting you say that. Now, I'm not necessarily comparing you to the Buddha, but...
I don't know. I am becoming a little more round.
But, one of the things the Buddha says is, don't trust what I say. You have to learn it on your own. And you're responsible at the end of the day.
Yep.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you agree with what he says. The Dalai Lama says this also. But you have to take some responsibility for figuring things out at some point yourself. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who would like to hear it from somebody, and I think this is one of the challenges, is they don't necessarily want to make the effort or spend the time to sort things out themselves.
And then it doesn't become yours, and it doesn't mean anything, and you're in the end shallow, and when push comes to shove, and I think, and I hope this isn't true, but at least for me, the reason I am who I am is because of the trials in my life. not because of the ease of my life, but the trials of my life. I actually feel, I can't imagine how some of the really good talent and really good politicians or whoever that get a free pass, I can't imagine how good they would be if they didn't get the free pass. Because it's that free pass that really cripples people. I spend a lot of my day, not as much as I used to, but a lot of my day, at the end of my day, in my prayers saying, okay, am I that guy? Am I that guy? What could I have done better? How could I have done that? Everybody's saying this about me. Is that true? And so you self-examine all the time. And with that self-examination, you grow. It's good. It's really good. I know who I am because I'm pushed up against the wall all the time.
Well, I think you probably have to acknowledge, though, that some people have perceived you as being divisive, or...
Well, I think I have been divisive.
Maybe you can... Do people think he's been divisive?
Yeah, you do. I mean, yeah. I think I haven't... It has not been my intent. It has not been my intent. But, I mean, look, what it was really interesting to me is if I wasn't growing, and if I said, yep, and I'm still doing it the way I was doing it 5 years ago, and that's just the way it is, people would hate me, okay? 30% of the country, or whatever it is, would hate me for that. But if I come out and say, and I have, on multiple fronts, you know, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't do it quite like that. I did the best I could at the time with the knowledge that I had, but I've learned, and I'm sorry for a lot of that. What's amazing is that same 30% now hates me because I'm a fraud. And you're like, what? Well, are you going to hate me because I don't change, or are you going to hate me because I'm trying to be better? At some point, you have to say, people are people, and we all make mistakes, and we all do our best. And at some point, you got to be able to look somebody at the eye and go, you know what, dude? You're doing your best, and that's all you can do. Good for you. Good for you. What'd you learn from that? Don't we all ask that from our kids? Our kids, if they kept running into the glass door, at some point you'd say, you know what, sit down, moron. But when your kids run into the glass door, you hug them and they're crying, and then you say, what'd you learn? Glass door, don't run through the... Good for you. Good for you. I've run into the glass door a lot.
Well,
Good for you.
I think we all have.
Yeah.
Do you know Jonathan Haidt?
No.
No, H-A-I-D-T.
No.
H-A-T. He's not one of the 30%. He's actually written a very interesting book. He's a social psychologist, and he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. And it's interesting because he says humans are really have not evolved to actually reason well. They have an intuitive sense, and it's the intuitive sense that guides them. And once they've made a decision, then they use reason to justify why they made their decision. And it's an interesting thing that actually, because he very specifically talks about these diverging viewpoints, as an example, politically, and the issues that separate us. And as I was saying earlier, there's probably much more about us that's alike than there is.
So here's how we pull people together, I believe. You and I have principles together. We have principles in common. I don't know how many policies we have in common. We have principles in common. I don't know how many interests we have in common, okay? What's happening to our country and our world right now, and the reason why we're all so screwed up, is because our politicians, our political parties, and our citizens, and our pundits are all talking about interests. Easy ones. Do we torture? Our interests say Well, what are the situations? I mean, if we have terrorists here and they're going to blow something up, of course we torture. But if I said to you, do we torture? Talk to me about principles. Everyone in this room would say, no, America doesn't torture. We are not those kind of people. But once I introduce interests, now it changes. Do we spy on Americans? Do we spy on one another? Our principles tell us, no, of course we don't do that. We're not the Stasi over in Germany. We don't spy. But our interests, well, now wait a minute. Look at how out of control things are getting. And all of a sudden we confuse it with interests. Well, our interests always change. I can always make an argument on interests. And the reason why everything in the world is falling apart and the reason why we're losing respect is because we don't even know what our principles are anymore. We don't know who we are. Jim, we have principles in common. The left and the right have principles in common. We may disagree on interests, but we've got to start tagging ourselves and anchoring ourselves in the principles. You know, the idea of gay marriage. Okay, Ben Carson said the other day that
it was the reason that a man becomes gay is he goes to prison, and that's how he learns to become gay.
I don't even understand that. I don't even understand that. Okay, here are my principles. I have nothing to do with your life. You have everything to do with your life. I don't control your life. The government should not control your life. One of the reasons why we have marriage license now is because the government started to issue them so you could stop blacks and whites from marrying. That's not a principle, that's an interest. The principle behind marriage comes because two people love each other and two people want to go to their house of worship or to their friend or to whoever, to the ship captain, a judge, whoever, and marry us. What difference does that make to me? What difference does that make to me? You live your life the way you live your life. Do no harm to others. I'll live my life the way I live my life. I'm not going to tell you what church to go to. You don't tell me I can't go to church. And we live side by side, and we somehow or another work it out. The reason why we're not working it out is because somebody is using interests, not principles, to divide us for power. We're having an argument that is won simply by reminding the American people we started marrying people with official government marriage license for two reasons. To stop biracial marriage, absolutely wrong, and two, so they can have control of money and taxes. What are we arguing about? Stop it. Let's just love each other.
Does anybody disagree with that? You know, it seems when we say it, loving each other should be easy.
No, you're married.
That's the easiest thing in the world.
Loving my grandmother, when I called and I said I was getting a divorce, my grandmother, who was the sweetest old lady, she literally died baking cookies. Her house smelled like sugar cookies all the time. And it was right before Christmas when my grandmother died. And she wasn't feeling well, but she wanted to make sugar cookies for the family. And she literally, with her apron on and everything, died baking the sugar cookies. Perfect way for her to go. Maybe not for her, but for us. Well, Grandma's dead, and there's cookies. But she was the sweetest lady. I just loved her. And I called her up and I said, Grandma, we're getting a divorce. And she, a side of my grandmother that I had never seen before, she said, shame on you. And I said, What? Sweet little old grandma, what? She said, shame on you. Do you think your grandfather and I actually liked each other all those years? I said, well, yeah. She said, we didn't. We loved each other. We loved each other, and we committed to loving each other. And that's what life is about. You get through it, and your love grows. So I don't think love is necessarily all that easy. You have to choose to do it. If it was, we'd all be Jesus.
Speaking of Jesus, that's another we get into religion, and instead of bringing people together, of course, sometimes it can separate people.
Religion is a problem. Spirituality and God is not. Too many times, look, I'm a Mormon, and we are like the Jews of the Christian world,
I have to process that.
Yeah, you just have to think about that one for a while.
Is that because you're the chosen people?
No, it's because we're really not popular. And it's funny, right before I did Restoring Honor, I asked Ralph Reed to bring the biggest spiritual leaders, Christian spiritual leaders, together in one room and let me talk to them. Because I was trying to put together the Black Robe Regiment, which now has 76,000 pastors in America. And we were starting with 30. And he said to me right before he came in, he said, Glenn, I don't know how long they'll sit in those chairs. And I said, is it because? And he said, yep, you're a Mormon. And I said, good, they can all unite on their disdain for my faith. And they can all say, well, we're not all going to get sucked in by him, so might as well go. And I said, just give me a few minutes. And I stood up and I bore my testimony of my faith. And every single one of those pastors are now my friends. And good friends, deep friends. And I have seen a remarkable change in people. I have seen when I went to Israel, there have been people who went with us to Israel here? A few people? Yeah, 4 or 5. So we were in Israel. And if you remember that first night, I was so afraid. We did 3 nights. And we brought about 15,000 Christians, and I think there were about 100 pastors that came. And then we invited the Jewish community from Israel to come with us. And we were there one night, and it was the first night, and it was in Caesarea, and I got up, and I had been praying, and I knew what I had to say. This was a really God-driven event for me. I was not on my mission, I was on his work, I felt. And the thing that I felt I needed to say was, to the Christians and the pastors, how dare you? Now imagine asking, hey everybody, come over to Israel. We're gonna have a great time. And then looking at them and saying, thank you for coming, how dare you? But what it was, we are here because we love people. Don't come here because you want to baptize the Jew. You want to save the poor Jew. And I started, if you remember, I started with, name one place in the world where people of faith, Christians, are gathering in the same place where they've been for 2,000 years, praying through a wall because it's the closest they can get to where they were told to pray. And they do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not by any other reason other than God told them to do it. So don't tell me that we don't have things to learn from them. Don't tell me, if it wasn't for them standing guard, we wouldn't have the first part of the book. We have the second part of the book. They have the first part. And all I know is that I believe God is like my dad. And I can understand him. And it may be foolish to think of him this way, and I'm sure he'll have a talk with me afterwards, but this is the way I understand him. He's my dad. And I'm his child. Now, I have 4 children. He's got 4 billion. I can't imagine what his day is like. But I know at the end of my day, when I tell my kids, look, I want you to go upstairs, I want you to brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, and I want you to get into bed. I don't have 4 billion, I have 4. And I've given each of my kids an instruction on what I want them to do. I don't give a flying rat's ass what my child thinks I told my other child to do, and I certainly don't care what my child thinks my other child should be doing or didn't do right when I'm standing at the bottom of the stairs and I'm hearing them argue, and I'm like, kids, did you get your teeth brushed? You have your pajamas on? Are you in bed? Did you clean up your towel in your bathroom? I'm coming. I'm coming. And I don't know about anybody else, but as I walk up the stairs, I'm saying to them, I'm coming. And when I get into your room, your teeth better be brushed, your pajamas better be on, and I don't want to hear about what your brother did. That's between you or me and your brother. Do what you're supposed to do.
Does that work?
No. But here's the good news. It's not working for God either. Because that's what we're doing. We're all worried about, look, I have my job, you have your job. You've been assigned whatever it is to do what you're supposed to do. Do it. I'll support you, unless you're blowing people up, because I don't believe God tells people to do that. He tells people to love people, to cherish people, to hold them up, to empathize with them, have compassion, feed them, heal them. That's what he tells them to do. And if that's what you're trying to do, I am with you. I'm with you.
You know, it's interesting. Somebody said to me the other day, they said, people's response to you or their comments to you, that's their karma. How you respond to them, that's your karma. And I think that's
yeah, it is.
One of the things we have to think about. Because, you know, instead of having these types of immediate responses, it's being more thoughtful.
Look, I mean, 2 days ago I had a guy on the air. 2 days, the day before. He was adopted. I don't know if anybody saw him. He had no arms. He was from Romania, had no arms. He was sitting there and playing the guitar with his feet while he's having a conversation with me. And I'm like, dude, I can't play with my hands. And he had just this great attitude. Married, has a kid, 23 years old, smart, great. He was unwanted. At 18 months old, he was 9 pounds. He was in a orphanage in Romania where they just are disposable. 9 pounds. Now look at him. Today I'm driving in San Francisco and I'm seeing these homeless people. Some of them are obviously unwell. Some of them are there by choice. I saw one guy, he had to be 80, 70, 80. And he was crippled with cerebral palsy. And so his hands were all in. He was in an electric wheelchair, and he had a grocery bag on the ground. And we sat there at the light, and I watched him. He was all by himself. He had gone grocery shopping, and when the light changed, he struggled to reach down, and he picked up his bag, and he put it on his lap, and he went. And I thought, don't anyone tell me you can't do it. Look at, that's a hero to me. That's somebody who says, my life, I've been dealt different cards. But look at me. I am still a human being. I still have the dignity in my own life to run my own life and to be in charge of my own life and to live it to the fullest extent that I can live it. That's a celebration of humanity.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you. One of the challenges, though, is that, as an example, and some of the people who have not been able to overcome that. As an example, when you're talking about your own issues with alcohol or drugs, and fortunately you met your wife, but what happened if your wife hadn't been there? And I think one of the things we have to think about sometimes is that it's easy to sit here and say, yes, look at this example and that
Sure.
example, and they overcame it and they did it, and look at you.
No, but I think here's the thing. Was Steve Jobs born a genius? I think you could make the case that he had something special going on upstairs when he was born. He might have been just wired just slightly differently. I don't know. But he was wired differently. But it wasn't just what he was born with. His upbringing had a lot to do with it. So he also had his upbringing changed that a little bit. It influenced him. But the biggest thing in his life was his choice. Because good or bad, the guy could have been a guy playing a guitar on the street and gone crazy. Some people who are that bright go nuts. He might have gone nuts. He could have looked at his upbringing and said, this really sucks. But through all of the influences and everything he had, I think he was given a little extra juice. Okay, maybe not. I think he was given a little extra juice. He probably had some really good influences around him in his life, just like you did, 13. All of a sudden you have an impact in your life. But then you choose. And you have to do your part. It doesn't mean that we have equal outcomes. We're not all going to be Steve Jobs. We don't have equal outcomes. But we all have to do our part. And then I think it's up to the rest of us to look. I don't think there is a soul. I don't know of anybody, at least nobody in my circle of friends, that, let me say it this way. I got a call from a guy 5 years ago, and I had talked to my bishop when I grew up poor. We didn't have money. We just didn't have money. I don't know how to give charity. I don't know how to be responsible with that amount of money. And so I went to my bishop when I first signed a big contract, and I said, and he worked at Goldman Sachs, and I said, I need financial counseling. And he said, not my role. And I said, no, I need spiritual financial counseling. I need to know how to be generous and how to be a good steward of my money for charity. And he said, well, this doesn't work for everybody, but I look at it as a business. He said, what you're doing is you're given responsibility of money. And so now your job is to figure out who could you invest that in that's going to make the most of that money to do the most good. How can you give it to somebody, and who can you give it to where the maximum amount of that dollar does what you're trying to do for good? So a couple months go by, and a guy calls, and in our church, it's very regimented. It's the largest welfare system outside of the federal government in the world. And most people don't know that. It's just very, very quiet. But it's a huge welfare program. But it's very regimented. And so this guy calls me, and he's in church with me, and he says, hey, Glenn, I'm having these problems, blah, blah, blah. And I can clearly help him. And I said, oh my gosh, that's horrible, absolutely. Have you called the bishop? And he said, no. And because I know the system, something was wrong. And I said, okay, well, let me get back to you. called the bishop up, and I said, Bishop, this is tearing my heart out. I can help this guy. And he said, Glenn, I'm going to ask you to do the hardest thing you've ever done. Please don't. Please don't. And I said, but I can. And he said, I know, but we've been working on him, and he's got things that he has to do that are hard. And you're an alcoholic, so you know. You'll enable him. Please don't. You'll do more damage by helping than by not. Believe me, he has everything he needs. If he'll just do a few extra things, it will all be okay. As it turns out, it was. We have to be able to help each other and not just have, Bono said, I've been going to the governments and saying, just give all this money. I've learned that's not necessarily the best way to do it. We have to help, but let's empower people, not buy them.
You know, it's interesting because you're in Silicon Valley, and one of the things we hear frequently, which is sort of almost now a mantra in Silicon Valley, is social entrepreneurship, and we have to have programs that pay for themselves and are sustainable. But, you know, I haven't quite figured out how feeding a child who's hungry is a sustainable proposition. And that's not to say, obviously, that you don't try to, whatever the populace is, give them tools, as I will refer to the Bible. You know, if you teach them how to fish versus just give them fish. But there are some instances, I think, where sometimes you do just give money because that's the most helpful thing.
Of course you do.
But sometimes here, everything has to make money, and it has to pay itself back, it has to pay its way, and it's really sort of a fascinating phenomenon because that's almost become the mantra.
I think you have to be led by the Spirit. You have to be led by your heart. There's sometimes that, you know, walking down the street, I'll see somebody who is homeless and you help them. There are times that you just don't. But I think here's where I have a problem with charity per se, government charity. It is not the government's responsibility. It takes away our responsibility. And I know this because I lived in New York, and you pay taxes out the eyes. They literally take your wallet out through your eye socket. It is an amazing thing. But when you pay for it, and you know that they have more beds than homeless on the street, and there are people that are paid to go, and they know the homeless people, and they go and they have to search for them every day and say, hey, you know there is a bed, okay? It's a very wellish run system for government, and there's a lot of money being spent there. Here's the problem with it. It does a lot of good, but it equally does bad. When the city takes care of everything for you, I found myself, not with a homeless problem, but with garbage and everything else. I'll be in my town, and I'll see garbage on the street, and I'll pick it up and I'll put it in the trash bin. In New York, I actually caught myself saying, why the hell hasn't the city fixed this yet? Because you're paying, they tell you, don't, we'll do it. And then you just expect everything to be done. It's our responsibility. I want to live in a city where I pick up the garbage. Yes, we have garbage men, but if I'm walking down the street and I see a piece of garbage, I pick it up and put it away. Look at how dirty San Francisco is. It's amazing to me how dirty it is. Why? Don't we respect the place we live, or have we just thought somebody else is going to take care of that? It's not the government's responsibility. They are the last resort, and so they do play a role. But it is our primary responsibility to love one another and to care for one another and to take care of one another. And we should see it. Our problem is we like to live in a bubble where we don't really look at things. You know, don't really look at the homeless person. No, Look at them. Don't let them become invisible. Well, should we torture? Well, I don't know. I don't want to think about that. I'll let somebody else decide. No, they're doing it in your name. You decide. And if the President of the United States couldn't stand in a room where we are torturing somebody and then face me and his children and say, yes, this is what we did, and here's why, then he has no place to tell others to do it. I don't know if this is going well or not.
Now, I may agree with you about the trash issue, but you know, there are some people though who like to promote that if we got every branch of the government, every program, everything essentially that the government offers to keep society civil, if you will, that everything will work out on its own. And I'm not sure if that's really been the experience.
I think I think that's an unfair game that people play sometimes, because life is not about absolutes. I mean, we have a government. Our founders put together a brilliant system. We need a government. You know, I'm not with the anarchists. We need a government. We need a constitution. We need rules. And we need each other, and we do need a system of last resort. We don't, we are finding it increasingly easy to let someone else do the hard things. Let's change it from, it might be easier to understand this concept with war than homelessness. Right now, people are killing other people in our name. We all will be, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, not to stand is to stand, not to speak is to speak. God will not hold you guiltless. We are the most powerful group of people ever on the face of the earth. You go out and talk to people and say, hey, where are they killing people right now in your name? Most people can't even say it. If we don't care enough to know where we're dropping bombs, who we're shooting, why we're shooting, if we're shooting the right people, and that we're taking care of the people when they come back here, good God Almighty, are we an amoral society?
But that's one of the challenges. I mean, if you look at some of our night hosts go out on the street and they ask people common questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost frightening how they...
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
You don't survive as a nation with an uneducated populace. You don't. You become slaves.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that, because if you look at the cost of, let's say, Afghanistan and the wars to date over there, Iraq, I mean, I think the bill's around $1 trillion, and they estimate it's going to be around $4 at the end of the day, probably $6.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at what $6 trillion could buy, if you look at what the $1 trillion could buy in terms of, you mentioned education.
Money really, I don't think money is our problem. I mean,
well,
you go to...
I would suggest without money, there is a problem. Can you guys all survive without money?
No, but that's, again, you're talking in absolutes, I think.
No, you're right, you're right. I'm just...
Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, we don't care. There's a good portion of the population that doesn't care. They care about Facebook, they care about their quick hit, they might care about their job, they might care about the movie that's coming out or something. They don't care. Nothing's real. I was telling you a story before we came out. I gave this talk down at the Launch Festival in San Fran. And these two girls came up, and they came up to my security, and one girl, she said, I'm a Pakistani chemical engineer, and I need to talk to him. That doesn't usually make my security comfortable. So he says, just a minute. And so they come up to me. And she actually comes up by herself at first. She's brilliant. She's a Muslim. She's from Pakistan. She is a chemical engineer. She's come to the United States to finish her studies, and she's going out on these big oil rigs out in the middle, and they're filming her. She's having people film her do these things that men are to do and women are not to do in Pakistan. She is an incredibly brave woman. And she was talking about the difference between Muslim extremists and Muslims. And she's like, you know, we're working really hard. And I'm like, you're a hero. You're a hero. You are somebody who is out there doing it. Here's a real rebel. Then her friend comes up. And her friend is an American, 23, going to college here in San Francisco. Pink hair, because she's a rebel. And she comes up, and I can't remember what she said, but she said something that was incredibly racist, accusing me of being racist against Muslims. Now, we've just had this great conversation, and she accuses me of being racist, and I don't remember what she said. And I looked at it, and I almost laughed, because it was like an 8th grade argument, and her friend is brilliant. And I said, actually, you know what you just said to me is really racist because of X, Y, and Z. And she went, what? And her Pakistani friend looked at her and went, yeah, he's kind of right. Now she went back and posted on Facebook this incredible post. Hey, I just met Glenn Beck, and we had this great conversation, and very open-minded and really, really good. And I noticed that she cut her pink-haired friend out of the picture. Swear to you. Now here's the thing. Her pink-haired friend was a college student that probably grew up in great wealth, hasn't really struggled, doesn't really know, but is standing up for her friend who is a Muslim. And so I'm gonna be there to protect her. I'm a rebel, I have pink hair. No, the one who's a rebel is the Muslim who is trying to show fellow Muslims women are powerful. That comes from strife. We have too many people who are movie rebels, who don't really think anything through because they've never been thrown up against the wall.
But it's speaking of Facebook, not that I'm ever on Facebook, this is a place in some ways where all of us view periodically. But it's funny because there was a post that basically said exactly that. It said, something along the lines of the people who have developed the most and have deep wisdom are often those who've suffered the most. And that's, I think, very true oftentimes.
I hope that doesn't have to be true.
Not at all.
I know that the people, I've just talked to a Christian pastor from China. He had escaped about 6 or 7 years ago, and now he smuggles people out who have been jailed for, reading the Bible or teaching the Bible. And I spoke to him, and he said, I said, we're praying for the people in China. And he said, oh, brother, they're praying for America. And I said, well, we need it. And he said, but they're not praying the way you think they are. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this last Christmas, I had a dissident that we just brought out of China. She had spent like 5 years in prison at a work camp. And he said it was right before Christmas and I bring her to my house. We take out all the Christmas ornaments, and she reaches into the box and she says, I'll untangle the lights. And they're all in a wad. And everybody's like, go for it. And he comes back a few minutes later and she's crying. And he said, and they're all fixed. And he said, what's wrong? And she said, I spent the last 6 years making these lights. She was the one in prison for celebrating Christ, not celebrating Christmas, making our Christmas lights. He said, Glenn, they're praying that America is greatly humbled. They're praying for America's downfall because it's the only way you'll remember who you are and be able to help the world again. I think we need a humbling. I know, I don't pray for it. The time I prayed for humility, I think it's the only thing that God is like excited to dish out. It's like there's a bell up in heaven or something that somebody's like, make me humble. The alarm bells go off and the angels are like, look, somebody wants to be humbled. He's like, I got that one. And he'll humble you fast, but it's good. It's good to be humbled.
We were talking earlier about sort of the journey you're on, and I'm not sure if humbling is the right word, but it's a journey to look at other perspectives, look at maybe be more thoughtful about culture, communication, having these types of conversations. We talked about our mutual friend, Erwin Kula.
I love him.
No, he's a very sweet guy. And
he's the rabbi, if you watch or listen, he's the rabbi from New York whose synagogue, he's in charge of people who, in his own words, are not just don't believe in God, they're mad at God. And he's about as left as you can get. But over a 3-year period, we've made great friends. He is my brother. I love him.
He's a very sweet guy.
Yeah, he is.
But I think that's the point, is that you learn over time on our journey that people can have different perspectives and have different worldviews. But again, when it gets down to the core, maybe principles, that you have so much in common, that's a very powerful thing that holds you together. And you can agree to disagree, but you can still be extraordinarily close.
That's what families do. And that's what we are. We're the family of man. We just forget it.
What, you mentioned this also when we were having our conversation. So what's next?
In what way? Be more specific.
If you could look 5 years from now and say, on this journey that you're on, what would be the best that you think could happen? What would it be that
I would be doing?
Yeah, I mean, you're an incredibly influential guy. I mean, I don't know if all of you know. I mean, I think it's the 75th most visited website, 25 million unique hits. And, you know, we talked about Erwin being very left. But, you know, obviously there's this incredible group of people who are very influenced by you, who are probably not quite as left as Erwin. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I have a lot of lefty friends, strangely. They're all in the closet.
Exactly.
They're all like, I'm a friend of Glenn Beck's. But
honestly, I mean, you do have this incredible power. You have this great following that we see many of them here. In terms of the power that you hold to influence, to care, to love, to give, where would that take you next?
I think that, I don't know, but I think my reason for being born, maybe, I don't know. What I'm supposed to do at some point, I don't know how, is is pretty much all charity work and I don't know how to describe it. If anybody went to Washington, D.C. and you felt that moment when we were together in Washington, D.C. on the mall, where it was just people coming together and being good and being filled and learning and connecting in different ways. When I met Billy Graham, we were supposed to meet for 30 minutes. I tried to meet with him. I felt like he had something to tell me. And I called him and I said, Billy, I'd like to meet with you. And he said, no, not interested. And I said, oh, okay. 2 years later, I'm standing in my office and I'm like, I know I have to talk to Billy Graham. There's something.
Could I ask two questions? One is, did you feel being called to talk to him?
Yeah.
And two is, why do you think he wanted to talk to you?
Why did he want to talk to me?
No, why did he not initially want to talk to you?
I think he just didn't have anything to say. He's like, I found out later he was a fan and everything else. He just didn't, I don't think he had anything to say. And that was fine, and I was, willing to say, I just put the call in, but I just knew, and so I'm standing in the lobby, and I've made the decision to leave Fox, and I haven't told anybody yet. And I said, I've got to talk to Billy Graham. And one of the guys that works with me said, well, have you called him? And I'm like, yeah. That afternoon, Billy Graham's office called me and said, Billy would like to meet you on Sunday. Can you come down to the house? I said, sure. So I flew down and he had 30 minutes. We ended up spending about 4 hours with each other. And Billy Graham said something that I never thought I'd hear Billy Graham say to somebody. And that was, he reaches over, grabs my hand. He looks me deeply in the eyes and says, can I ask you, do you like P.F. Chang's? I said, yes. Would you mind if we had P.F. Chang's? So we sat in his beautiful home having P.F. Chang's on the mountaintop, me and Billy Graham. But I said to him, I said, Billy, I knew we were going to meet, and I don't even have a question for you. I just feel like you have an answer for me. And he started to cry, and he's so sweet, and he said, I feel as I failed you. And I said, no, you didn't. And he said, I don't have an answer. And he said, I should have been fasting and praying. And I said, Billy, you know God better than that. If there was an answer, it will come. We leave. He gives me a gift. I go back home. It's Monday. I'm eating my lunch. And I open the gift, and it's a book. And in the book is the answer. And I called him and I said, I got my answer, Billy. And it's what I believe my future will be, but I have absolutely no idea how to get there yet.
Are you going to share it with me?
No.
This could have been a breaking story. Do you know what I thought he was going to say? He was going to say, and then I opened it, and it was a gift certificate.
I'm going to be making chopsticks.
You mentioned charity work. Through Mercury One, I think you've given over 20 million, raised 20 million to charity.
Yeah. It's you. We have the most charitable giving audience ever. I mean, I knew when I really changed when my program director came in. I was still on the top 40 station, and I had really fundamentally changed. And the program director came in and said, could you cut the calls down, please? And I was just spending time with people on the phone, and they would call in. And I was so fascinated to hear about their life and to see what was going on. You know what I mean? I was finally out of me. And I'm like, and honestly, in 1980, people used to joke that my slogan was, I hate people. I love people now. I just love people. And we have the greatest set of listeners and viewers, I truly believe, ever assembled. They are amazing. And the great thing, I figured this out when we went to do a deal called Man in the Moon, which was, hey, why don't you guys come out in the middle of the desert in the middle of the summer, and I'm gonna do something on a big 40-foot moon. And people came, 20,000 people came. And we're like, why are they coming? Why are they coming? And I figured it out. Because they like each other. They sense community, and they sense, I'm with good people, and I understand these people because they all want to do good. And so when we started a charity, and we started Mercury One, and I say, hey, there's this going on, or there's this going on, we were the first on the scene with, what was it, Hurricane whatever up in New York, Sandy or something that happened up in New York. We're in Dallas. We had food and money and supplies on the scene in New York faster, in fact, 3 days faster than the federal government and faster than the Red Cross. How? People.
Maybe you can share with us, and I think, I don't know if it's that public, but there was a situation with the immigrant children who were on the border.
Yeah.
And actually you reached out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can share with some.
We were on the air, and and we were talking about how out of control this is, and how this is modern day slavery. I mean, what's happening with the colonias down on the border is slavery. And nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody wants to even look at it. And it's an American problem. And I'm talking in the air. And I'm hearing Pat and Stu talk. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, what do we do with this? With all the other things going on, what do we do with this? And I heard distinctly in my ear, I have to dig this air check, this tape out, because it's got to be funny, but because I'm saying to myself, what are we doing with this? And I distinctly hear, go feed them and love them. And I knew that would not be popular. And I said out loud, oh, geez, no. I know what we have to do. And Pat and Stu looked at me, and I said, it's not going to be something that is going to be popular, because everybody's going to misunderstand and everybody's going to make it into politics. But this isn't about politics. This is about people. And when I first said it, for about the first 3 days, because I didn't know how to say it, you know what I mean? Because everybody was talking about politics, and you got to stop with the politics. The politics is one side, but the responsibility of humanity is ours. And so everybody said to me, Glenn, this is going to kill you with the audience. And luckily, I've been poor and I've been rich, and I'll probably be poor again, and maybe I'll be rich again or whatever. But fame and fortune don't mean anything to me anymore, luckily. That we operate on principles doesn't matter. If the whole audience leaves us, but we believe we're doing right, so be it. It's okay. We had our good time together, and that's it. And so we stayed on it. And within 3 days, everything started turning, and people were calling and going, I get it now. You're not talking politics. I'm like, yeah. And we raised, what was it, $4 million in like 4 days, just on the air, and brought it down there. I brought the food down. We asked people that came from all over the country, just come help us serve. Just come and help us serve and love people. And they came down. We united for the first time. The Baptists and the Catholics down in this town are warring with each other for some reason or another. And I learned a new term. It's called sheep stealing. And the pastors and the Catholics in this town are worried about who's stealing people's sheep. I'm like, you guys got to get over that. And they come down. For the first time, every single religion, all the religious leaders, came in a room for the first time. And all of them were skeptical of me. And when they came in, they said, one of them said, we didn't think you'd actually show up. This is far too unpopular, and nobody comes to our town to help. And I said, well, I know it's unpopular, but we're here. And we prayed. We served all day. At the end of the day, we taped it, and I wish I could have shown the unedited because it was like 2 hours. It was unbelievable. We had preachers saying, we've got to close down our church on Sunday. Why are we meeting in a building? We should be meeting out where the homeless are. We should be meeting out, and we should be doing this together. The Catholics and the Baptists have now gotten together and are feeding. The Catholics were doing it, but they were in a really bad place to do it. And the Baptists had the right place to do it, but they could never get together. Now the Catholics are bringing all of the stuff to the Baptists, and they're serving together. It's an amazing thing. The thing I wish we could have done, and the thing that is part of what I believe my mission will be, is that following week, Israel was under attack. And we have given a lot of money to the hospitals in Israel, and the hospitals that take in Palestinians and Israelis and heal anybody who is sick. And they were under attack. And what I wanted to do was load a plane up with more than just the goods and services. We sent a plane load of food and stuff over to Israel the very next weekend. But I wanted to take all of those pastors from the border and load them on the plane. And now we're going to go serve somebody else. And then the following week, we'll take all those Israelis that we served and we'll go serve somebody else. Because what I learned at Auschwitz when I was there with my family was all these churches were everywhere. If anybody been to Auschwitz? Okay. There are churches everywhere. Old ones, they were there. They knew. And as I was driving away, I was so angry with the churches. Where were you? And I started doing my homework on the righteous among the nations. And the righteous among the nations were the people who saved Jews. And most of them, not all of them, but many of the righteous of the nations only saved a couple. And when they had one thing in common, they all said the same thing, and that is, yeah, the Jews stink on ice, but this is my Jew. I know these Jews. These Jews are different. No, they're not. You just know them. And so for us to heal ourselves, we have to get out of our own circles. We have to be able to come to uncomfortable places and have uncomfortable conversations and realize we're not that different from one another. We do have principles and humanity in common. So when we can take a group full of people that don't ever get together and then say, okay, good, we served you. Now let's go serve somebody else who's completely different too. We will all start to come together, and that bond will be unbreakable.
And it's interesting, one of the hardest things is to be compassionate to those who are not like you. And in fact, we have a training course, and it's based on psychology, but one of the hard things is, first of all, to be compassionate to yourself. You know, especially in the West.
Perhaps the hardest.
People beat themselves up, and being gentle with yourself, being kind to yourself, understanding you're a frail, fragile human being who deserves to be cared for. But beyond that, the next step is it's not as hard to care for those who you love, your family, your children, than for those who are your friends. It starts getting tough when it's people you're indifferent to, and then the next step is
Can I tell you?
I wanted to finish my.
Okay, go, sorry.
I was on a roll.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing is really those who you actually dislike, and that takes the greatest strength, it takes the greatest time, and it's hard. And but I think that's where hopefully we all try to head on our journey.
The story of the Good Samaritan. When you hear the story of the Good Samaritan and you don't say at the part where it says, and the one who did it was a Samaritan, and you don't go, you don't have any idea what that story's about. If I were telling the story of the Good Samaritan today, I would say that the guy's walking down the road. It's a really, really dangerous, horrible place that everybody knows you should not be. And it's wickedly dangerous. And here's this guy, and he ends up in a ditch. And now here comes the Catholic, and then here comes the Mormon, and then comes the atheist. And you know who stops and helps him? Jihad Johnny. That's the Good Samaritan story. The Samaritans were so despised, and they were the enemy. They were Jihad Johnny. So when we're supposed to love one another, we're supposed to realize that it's really not easy. It's love Jihad Johnny. And Jihad Johnny should love us. That's who our neighbor is. That's really hard. That's really hard. But if we're not praying for Jihad Johnny, we're not really doing our job.
Did you hear that story? And I'm not sure if it's actually completely true, but the story goes, there was a pastor who was going to take over a church, and he dressed like a homeless person, and he stood around the church as everyone was coming in dressed in their Sunday finest, and he was ignored. He asked people for money. They turned him away. The ushers told him to sit in the back of the church. And all these righteous people who showed up at church every Sunday, they were shocked when the homeless person came to the front and introduced himself as the new pastor. And it put into the perspective of this exact issue, which so many of us struggle with, where we judge people on how they look, how they act. We make decisions about them, but we don't know them. And I think, again, that's one of the hardest things.
I sat next to a guy in, two quick stories. I sat next to a guy in church in New York City. And I was running late, and my family was already sitting in, and it was crowded, and people were speaking, and so I just sat in the back. And then I sat next to a guy who was homeless, and I mean, full-fledged, hadn't taken a shower, smelled like urine, homeless. And I'm sitting next to him, and I'm wondering what this guy's life is like. And as I'm thinking about him, I'm listening to somebody who's speaking on the pulpit, And this person actually said, there's struggles in our church. There are people struggling right here around us. And I'm sitting next to this guy. There are people who don't get this quote, who don't get their children into the right schools. Wow. And I said to him,
Was this Silicon Valley?
no, it was New York City. And I said to him, I leaned over to him and I said, how you doing? And he said, it's good. I said, do you come here very often? And he said, I try to. I said, why? He said, the door is open and it's warm here. What a horrible answer. What a horrible judgment on us. Here's a guy who comes, and he's coming, and what he recognizes is the warmth of the room and not the warmth of the hearts. But nobody wanted to talk to him. Second story. I don't remember the name of the preacher. This is a true story. Preacher in California, in Los Angeles. He was a guy. He was raised atheist. Didn't know anything about, God and whatever. And living on the street, went into the church. They were feeding him, and somebody gave him a Bible, and he decided to read it. And so he starts going to church. And he's gone for about a month, and he's read the Bible several times. He's gone for a month, maybe 2 months. And he says to the pastor, as the pastor's walking by, when do we do all the stuff that's in the book? He started his own church. Because when are you going to start doing the stuff that's in the book?
And I think that's really the key is, and hopefully the goal of all of us is to do what's in the book.
Yeah.
Whatever that book is for you, but it's the book that brings us together, makes us care, and recognizes that we're all part of the same family. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you enjoyed this evening.
Thank you, guys.